I'm Maria Menounos, and you're tuned in to AfterBuzz TV, the ESPN of TV talk. Now, let the buzz begin.
Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to the Red Table Talk After Show. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler Simone, and I have two of my beautiful co-hosts here today, the Tyler Tyson and Jade Lamar. Hello, what's up? What's up? So, if you're new here, we are the Red Table Talk After Show, and we covered the latest Red Table Talk episode. Today, we are going to be covering the newest episode, How Gun Violence Affects Women. What were your overall thoughts about this episode, Tyler?
My overall thoughts about this episode was that it was a waste of time, low-key.
You felt like it was?
A little, just slightly. It was like, it's one of those episodes where if it was talked about at a different time, when life was quote unquote normal, then it would have been a great episode. And because of everything that was going on, because this episode came out last week, it was in the height of like everyone really being outraged, like currently. And so the episode just didn't really make any sense. And at the same time, because it's like, how do we talk about gun violence when everything is going on? It's like, we can't address this nuance until we address the bigger picture, which is police brutality. So it was just kind of like, I see it, I hear it, but I'm not really into this conversation.
I can completely agree. I think the timing of the conversation was off. And of course, it was pre-recorded. Mm-hmm. So not a lot of current events had happened like now. So it just seemed like it was just a generic conversation without addressing the obvious George Floyd issues and stuff like that. Like I was just like, okay, like you said, Tyler, they could have maybe kept it in the archives and maybe played it later in the year or actually did like a redo. But it didn't fit the current time.
Yeah, I think you guys are right, because gun violence is different from police brutality. They're two different things. And I know in the beginning, they kind of tried to tie the two together, referencing the women in George Floyd's life and the women in Ahmaud Arbery's life, it was nice for them to kind of make it make sense. But I agree, like, the timing was just a little bit off. Yeah. We see Lauren London in this episode, and we touch on Nipsey and his death again. We had an episode about it, right? Earlier?
I feel like we've talked about Nipsey a gazillion times, yeah.
I think we did talk about it before. But this time it was more so centered around her raising her two Black boys without him. So what were your reactions to maybe what you learned listening to her experience as the mother of the two little boys?
Well, I thought that once again, when she talked about the two boys that she's raising, the very first thing that she says that she for one is about the police, which once again goes back to my initial point, is the bigger story here, is the more important thing. And I don't know how old her kids are. I don't remember if she said that or not, but I know that they are younger than teenage years. And so it's like for her to already be having these conversations, granted their father was shot dead in the streets for whatever reason, and that whole thing is under investigation, but she wasn't even really talking about that. She was still talking about police brutality. The conversation she had with her kids was about, okay, if the police come to you, this is what you do, this is how you act, yada, 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 because I need you to get home. It wasn't even about grieving the death of Nipsey and having the kids understand why their dad was killed in the first place. It was still police brutality. So I appreciated that part of what she had to say, because that's a very real conversation that Jade Lamar even talked about before, that his mom sat all of them down and they've had so many conversations about it.
So many conversations. I think in the video, she said because of how she grew up, that she's always been kind of numb when it comes to killings. Mm-hmm. And because I think that she has that numbness, because she had to deal with it at such a young age, I think her mentality is more so, let me help my children not be a victim like other people around them. And I think that's what kind of made it kind of different, because you could tell like she wasn't allowing, her way of healing was like preparing them for whatever comes after that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they talked a little bit about the police and the fear that Black men specifically have for the police. And I wanted to talk to you guys about that and about maybe when you first started to realize that the way you move through life has to be different because of that. Do you guys remember when it kind of like clicked to you that, you know, I'm Black and I need to behave this way in order to stay alive?
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I'll let you go first, Jay, because I have to really think the first time because I think I know, but I want to make sure.
Yeah, I grew up in predominantly Black environments, and you know, I didn't grow up in like the best neighborhoods. So I was very much so aware that I am a Black man, and the police see me as a Black man, and therefore I need to watch what I do and how I do it from a young age. I can remember when my dad got pulled over and the police officer walked up to the car, and my dad, trying to be calm, cool, and collective, but was still like a bit paranoid. And the police officer asked my dad our phone number. And I had just learned our phone number. So I was just saying it all the time. And so my dad actually said our number, like, he said like a digit wrong. And from the back seat, I said, Daddy, our number is da 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 da. And my dad looked back at me like,
I can imagine that look he gave you, like, if you don't.
I can imagine it.
And then I remember like when the police officer like walked away from a car, my dad said, when a police officer is talking to me as a Black man, you don't respond, you don't talk. I don't want him talking to my children. And it immediately my thought process was, oh, well, anytime I'm around police and they're talking to my parents, let me not butt in. Because my dad was more so fearful that the police officer would say something derogatory towards me, and then that would cause him to react as a father and a protector. So from a young age, to me, I always knew that there was a difference between my few white friends and my few white family members and me as a Black man.
So mine is it's hard to believe, but it's a little bit different. So I did not have, raised by my dad, Willie, and my grandmother, neither one sat me down and had like the police talk. And we didn't grow up in like the wealthy neighborhood, but we weren't in the hood either. We were somewhere in between. And so my experience up until college, all of my friends were white. All of the schools I went to, for the most part, were white or really, really diverse. But because I was in AP and honors classes, my constituents, they were all white. Because what I didn't realize, but later found out, was that they didn't readily put Black kids in the advanced and honors classes. Like, you had to advocate for yourself. Your parents had to fight for you. Like, you had to like really be like, no, my child deserves the best, the best, the best. But I didn't see that as a kid. So it wasn't until I got ready to go to college when I started driving, maybe my first interaction with the police. And then the conversation was had as, yeah, I mean, I always knew I was Black. I always knew, being the only Black among the white kids, obviously getting treated differently from time to time, like those things were just there. So I knew that. But as far as my interaction with the police, my first interaction with the police and the first time kind of having that nervousness is when I started driving at like 15 or 16, somewhere in there. And then it's just been an ongoing struggle ever since. So of course we had conversations after that, but it wasn't until I started driving.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It wasn't until I started driving that I had to really think about that, and that there was fear when a police officer pulled up behind me and I didn't really know why. But for Black men, I know it's on a totally different level with everything that's been happening.
Before you move on real quick, you know what's so crazy to me? Because even hearing you say and hearing other Black women talk about their paranoia, their issue with the police, it sounds so foreign to me, because in my mind, the police would never mess with a woman. If you're a woman, you're safe, regardless of what race. I mean, obviously we know that's not true, but just the way my mind works, I'm thinking, oh, if they're a woman, the police are absolutely not going to mess with any women. But y'all have the same issues that we have.
Yeah.
Same issues.
Sandra Bland opened up our eyes to that in a completely different way. Because I thought the same way. I grew up around nothing but boys. And so all of us, I thought, had a different conversation than, the two girl cousins that I had, or the two girl neighbors that I had. I mean, we had conversations like you guys had it when you started driving. We had it when we first got bikes.
Yeah.
My mom was like, if you come in contact with the officer, give them our phone number, give them our address, and make sure they bring you back here before anything happens and stuff like that. So
yeah, and
so weird.
yeah,
I
that's
talk
true.
to my parents about that because I have cousins, of course, number of cousins that are in the hood, and I loved hanging out with my cousins. So I was in the hood. So I'm not trying to make it seem like I wasn't there, because I was. But I do not recall my parents giving me this like, yo, this is what you do. This is how you act. I know I didn't get that until I started driving, when I probably should have gotten it hanging out in the hood as much as I did with my cousins, because it definitely could have gone tragic real quick.
Yeah.
Yes, but you're here and you're safe.
Amen.
You mentioned the hood, and I kind of wanted to talk about the point she made about high school parties and how traumatizing it is to go to a house party and feel like, okay, where's the exit? If this happens, I'm gonna do this, make sure I get out here. And I wanted to know what you guys' experiences were, because I had that too, but I didn't really realize it. It kind of became normal to be on guard at house parties.
Once again, for me, my mama was like, if we went to anywhere that was in like a small space, Renee always said, you better know where the exit is at all times. So even when I went to house parties, I was always, if I was on the wall, like I was always on the wall by the door, or like on the wall by a window. Like in my head, I was always trained to always have an escape route.
Mm-hmm.
And like Laura London said, and like Jada said, like as kids, you shouldn't have had that mindset. But growing up in some of the environments that we grew up around, we had to enjoy ourselves, but we also had to protect ourselves at the same time. And my mom always told us when we left the house, make sure y'all come back to me. Make sure y'all come back to me. So I think that me and my brothers felt like it was our responsibility to make sure that not only we looked out for each other's, but that we took care of ourselves in any environment. And where I'm from, we had a lot of basement parties.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
that's Ohio, right? Is that Cleveland?
Cleveland, we had a lot of basement parties. So it wasn't like you didn't have access to the whole house because you ain't want nobody going up in your mama's room.
Mm-hmm.
So you do a basement party. So even in the basement, there's no exit in the basement.
Right.
Like we would always, me, my brother, my friends, we would always be posted up like by the stairs. Just in case a fight broke out or something broke out, I mean, we knew how to get out.
Yeah.
But thinking back to it, it's like, I want to make sure that my kids are as aware that as street smart, as my mom would say, as I was. But then also you want them to enjoy life. But the day that we're in, it's like, they have to enjoy life, but they have to also be very, very conscious of the environment that they're in.
Yes.
Yeah. So as far as house parties go in high school, so I was that G in high school. I was the kid. Listen, every mother loved me in high school. Whether I was dating your daughters or not, they just loved me. And so if whoever I was with, they would normally have a curfew of, let's say, like 11 or 12. If they were with me, their curfew could be as long as I was out. And my parents let me stay out till I was like until like 2 a.m. So high school, I didn't really have any house party issues unless I was throwing the house party. And in which case it was never at a house, it was at some location. But in college though, I went to a HBCU, FAMU all day. And that's when my house party experience really took on a whole new life. And like J'Lamar said, we don't have basements in Florida because, you can't go too low below ground before you hit water. So it was just normal. I told you what happened. It was normal, regular house parties. And I didn't have any issues. Like there were never any fights. Every now and then somebody would drink too much and it was a thing, but I didn't have any issues. And whenever something got out of control, like Jay said, I was the first one out the door. So if there was one scuffle I remember, and there were a lot of underage drinking going on, and once again, I was out the door. So
yes. Well, that kind of brings us to another topic they brought up in this episode, which was gang violence, and how gang violence not only affects the targeted person, whomever that is, but it affects the people that they leave behind if they do end up passing, and then also just putting innocent people in harm's way and people being killed for just being there in the area. And we got introduced to Erica Ford, who created Life Camp Inc. She had that big orange bus, which was really, really cool. How did you guys feel about her wanting to help both the people's families that are left behind, and then talking to the gang member? Because I thought that was really interesting.
I think it's a good conversation. I think it's a good conversation and a good meaningful thought to have. I mean, there's so many, when one person dies, there's so many people affected. The killer's family is affected as well. The victim's family is traumatically affected. So kind of providing that support for those two groups, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. And it's the same thing with the whole prison thing. Like, when people go to prison, it's not just the inmate whose lives have changed, it's the entire family. So, I mean, you can only imagine when someone gets killed, your entire family is affected, both the victim's family and the person that took the other person's life. Everybody's lives are affected. So I think that I think it's a pretty good idea to have, you know, the person at some point have a conversation with the victim's family if they're open to it. Of course, you have to be respectful depending on the circumstances. If the victim's family is like, you know what, I'm just not there yet. I'm not at a place. I don't know if I'll ever be at a place. You have to respect that. And as the person that caused that issue, you really have to respect it, because you're the one that caused all of this in the first place. You took this person's life. And so you have to understand that they may not want to talk to you.
Exactly. And yeah, she sat down with Primo, who was a former gang member. Her name was Norleen, whose son was shot 5 times. And I can't imagine what she was feeling to sit down with someone who, not to say that was her son's killer, but it's just to sit down with someone who's involved in the same stuff, I'm sure was really hard for her. And like you said, Tyler, it seems like the best thing you can do to stop things like this from happening is just to have a conversation and to see both sides, because it seems like it just takes us sitting face to face to understand.
Yeah, that's all it takes, is a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes more than that, but sometimes a face-to-face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes more than that. They also, what else do I want to talk about? Yes.
I was gonna say, I don't know if our producers can hear us, but the guest that we have on the show is in the wings at some point whenever y'all are ready. But continue.
Okay.
Oh, a special guest.
Hi.
Greg.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hi. How are you?
I'll go ahead.
Good. How are you doing?
Y'all,
Good.
This right here is my boy Greg Bishop. You can give your actual credentials in a minute as far as like what you do verbatim. And also, if you don't mind, can you turn your phone horizontal so that we can
is that
screen effect? I think you have to unlock it or something. It should be a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, so Greg and I have known each other since college. He was my first program director at the first radio station that I ever worked at. And now he works in New York City in the mayor's office. And like I said, he can give you his actual credentials and title and perfect and all of that great stuff. So Greg, welcome to the Red Table Talk After Show. We're talking about gun violence, and we're kind of tying it into police brutality a little bit. I know you're there in New York City, and you guys have been going through a whole overhaul with COVID-19 and with everything that's going on. So I thought this would be the perfect place to kind of talk to you and get your input on things. So we have J'Lamar as well as my girl, Miss Tyler Simone. So welcome to the Red Table Talk After Show.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. And I want to say that it is so good to see you. It's been a long time in terms of like a long way from WA&M. So congratulations on your show and all the stuff that you guys worked on. So I have been in government for 11 years. I was most recently the former commissioner of small business services here in New York City. And right now I'm a senior advisor for small business recovery and focus focus mainly on what does that mean that businesses did not get the monies that they needed, and most of those businesses were either Black or Latino businesses, because most of our businesses tend to be small. So my job is to work with the private sector and figure out how we can connect the fact that the private sector wants to help our small businesses with the communities that really need that help. So that's what I'm doing now.
Okay, and we lost some of what you said at the beginning because it was kind of like breaking up a little bit.
We'll
probably
freeze?
need
I noticed you froze too.
So we'll probably need you to repeat at least the beginning of exactly what you do. We heard the tail end of it, just so our listeners are completely clear on,
So I in New York City, and I think you heard I've been in government for 11 years under 2 administrations. But my job right now is as senior advisor for small business recovery is to help connect the private sector who wants to help small businesses with the community. And when I say the community, meaning there are neighborhoods in New York City that were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Most of them, if not all of them, were Black and Latino neighborhoods. And those small businesses in those neighborhoods really need additional help. So if you have, and many companies here in New York City are very concerned about our small businesses and the ability for our small businesses to recover. So they want to help. And my job is to make that connection.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
Understood.
I'm going to let everybody else kind of jump in and ask their questions. I think I just have one general question. I'll get mine out of the way. Because like I've known you for so long, and I know how you are involved in the community just across the board, both at work and outside of work. In terms of what is the atmosphere, the vibe, everything like in New York, considering the heightened attention to the disproportionate effects of Blackness in this country and how we're affected by the police and COVID and everything. Like, what is the mindset in New York?
Yeah, so, I would say that, COVID, let's start with COVID first. And the mindset was, we're a resilient city, right? New York, as you know, is a global city. We are used to being a target for terrorists. We're used to, the fact that we have such density challenges that other cities don't deal with. But we're a resilient city. So, Hurricane Sandy impacted our city. 9/11 impacted our city. I could go far back and I wasn't around, just to be clear, but like in the late 70s, in the late 70s, when the Bronx was burning, when we had, real racial challenges here in the city, but we've always recovered. So this was always sort of like, okay, let's figure out how we can help our small businesses during this moment. And then let's figure out how we will rebuild, because New Yorkers are resilient. New Yorkers are like, we will get through this. George Floyd sort of changed the narrative a little bit, right? So COVID had already established like, okay, why are Black and Latino populations more impacted, right? And then there was the conversation about, well, most of the Black community are essential workers or didn't have the luxury of working from home because of the careers that they're in, or couldn't afford to leave the city like most of our wealthy residents did when they left and went out to the Hamptons or upstate or wherever, right? Most of our Black and Latino citizens rode the subway, right? They didn't have access to, private vehicles, right? So there then started to be a conversation And it's always been happening, but a conversation about, wait a minute, like we just can't recover and go back to normal, right? There is no, like normal will mean that if this happens again, then the same community will be impacted. Yeah. So what can we do about it? So the mayor created a race and equity task force. I'm on the workforce committee. And basically we were talking about, okay, well, what can we do to get individuals into better jobs, right? The service industry was impacted tremendously. And when I say service, like hotels, I mean, New York thrives on tourism, right? Everybody wants to come to New York. You want to go to a Broadway play. You want to have a restaurant. You want to go to a club. All that is closed, right? So everyone in those sectors, and they're predominantly Black and Latino, they're unemployed, right? So the question is like, how do we then use the funding that we have to help retrain service workers? Like, how do we figure out, and you know, New York as a whole, and I could do a whole show about like just New York, and if anyone is interested, they should read The Power Broker by about Robert Moses, who was an urban planner and in the 40s and 50s, but there's questions about whether he was racist or not, right? Because every single highway, every single major infrastructure went through Black neighborhoods, right? So when you have those things happening, what do you have? An increase in asthma rates because you have all these trucks running through your neighborhoods, et cetera, right? So you have an increase in asthma, you're more susceptible to COVID, right? You have diabetes because you don't, well, why? Because there's no fresh food in Black neighborhoods or communities of color, right? So there's so many systemic racism built into all our systems that we're now having a hard conversation about how can we change that, right? How can we change the fact that there's a lot of Black individuals who own property, but they're in the furthest area of the city susceptible to climate change, right? The sea levels are expected to rise and their property value will decrease because they're going to be in a floodplain, right? That is lost wealth, right? Because you know, if you have property, that's where you get the home equity loan to start your business or whatever. If you don't have property, then you're kind of screwed, right? So there's a lot of now focus on the systemic racism that's inherent in all the structures of government, and how we could actually change that and what we can do about that.
That was an amazing answer. Thank you for that. I feel like I learned a lot just within that one.
Just in that one answer, I'm like, oh, wow, there's a lot of things I didn't even think about. It's like this ongoing thing.
That was real deep.
It was.
Listen, there's a Like, she is very intentional, and that's what we need to be doing.
Definitely. So, Greg, I had a question for you about how we move on from this, and in particular, how white people can move on and continue the conversation in the rooms that
Right.
we're not present in, because
Right.
like you were saying, it's important to have the conversations. But for them, you know, what are things that they can do? Because it's one thing coming from us, but I do know that white allies has been a really big conversation lately.
Yeah. So, and I would say that, you know, that's a great question. So there's a couple things, and I'll be quick because I realize if I get too deep, then it's going to freeze again. But literally, first, this country needs to like acknowledge that racism exists, right? We have not done that. And if you look at, for example, South Africa, they had a truth and then reconciliation commission, right? The truth is this country was built on the labor of the enslaved, right? And we as a country need to acknowledge that. And whether you're black, white, I mean, we know this, right? But our white allies need to acknowledge that and then understand what has happened, the systemic racism that's been built into every infrastructure, and then use their privilege, right? So the answer to your question is what type of conversation. So as a white person, and I look around the table and I don't see any representation, then I'm going to start saying, hey, what are we doing to increase the diversity of this board? If I'm a CEO, right, understand that if you start a company, if your first 5 employees, if you don't have diversity in your first 5 employees, you will not have a diverse organization. So understanding that, and then understanding how to actually be intentional about finding talent. There's no excuse. And everyone says, I cannot find that particular talent. That is not accurate, right? You can find that talent. You just have to put in extra work because we're out there. Look at everyone on this call right now. Like literally, we are educated, we've gone to school, we have talent, right? It's using your privilege to make sure that you address a systemic issue. That's a conversation our white allies need to start having.
I like that. That was a good answer.
Yeah. What type of things has your job done to make you feel like a key asset as a Black man? And what type of advice would you give organizations that are struggling with making their Black employees feel like they're important?
So, I mean, so there's a couple things, right? So in government, and that's the other thing, there need to be more me in government, right? A lot of us, I get it. You're focused on making the money. If you're not at the table, like literally, you can't have that influence. So, you know, we've talked. I started in one administration, the Bloomberg administration, and at that time, it was all about how do you increase the amount of contracts that we are awarding to minority and women-owned businesses, and the strategies that we could take there, and pushing that agenda. Then this Mayor de Blasio came in and put in a lot more resources. So we were able to increase the utilization to almost like 30%. Last fall, I did a whole initiative around Black entrepreneurs because I was very specific. Like government needs to have an answer for Black entrepreneurs. So I was able to do that because I was in a position to actually not only implement, but actually affect policy, right? I would say for your second part of the question, because I have seen small, you know, businesses, because I've seen, you know, just different organizations, and I've participate in a leadership program where we talk about power and privilege, I'm able to have direct conversations about race. You have to be able to not only have those conversations, but have a structured conversation in a way that you end up with, what are we going to do about this problem? It's easy to identify the problem. And I'll tell you, folks and stakeholders have told me a number of times when we're talking about the Black community, the Black community has been studied and studied and studied to death, right? You could even look at the federal government just recently when the president talked about, I don't know why COVID is impacting the Black community. We're going to do a study. Everybody said, no, there's studies out there. We know exactly what the problem is. So it's really more about solutions,
we lost
right?
it.
Now we have
Just
we got frozen again?
Okay, we're good.
Slightly, just slightly.
Technology.
See, I feel this is a conspiracy because we're talking.
They don't want us to be great.
I bet you this never happened. This never happened until like that Black dude got on and started spitting about it. But listen, in case anyone missed it, the Black Tax, definitely find that book and educate yourself, right? Because to follow up on that question, you cannot have a conversation about race if you don't know like the history to educate someone else, right? And this is not about feelings, right? This is not about I feel bad because you looked at me the wrong way. This book is about facts, right? This book is about this is how many Black folks were enslaved. This is the earning potential of those Black folks. This is the money that was lost, right? It's all dollars and cents. So anyone can understand dollars and cents. And by doing that, then you can really have a good conversation.
Yeah, I feel you on that. Yeah. Well, Greg, I do appreciate, because we are running out of time. I appreciate you hitting us up. There's so much more I want to ask you, but you know, we're limited on time, so I'm sure we'll be having more conversations.
So this could be a teaser, and then you could then say like, you know, everybody loved the conversation. They want more, and I will, you know, set aside a whole hour, 2 hours, whatever, because I'm passionate about this stuff, and the more of us that are having deliberations, the better it is for the community as a whole. Anyway, happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Well, I'll definitely be hitting you up because I want to know. Black Lives Matter. We need to figure out how we can utilize the information that you have and use it to help the agenda. So you'll definitely be getting more phone calls from me.
Absolutely, yeah. As an entrepreneur, I'm gonna hit you up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. We learned a lot just in this short time. Yeah, we definitely need to have you on again for sure. We'll plan it.
Tell the people where they can follow you on Instagram and all of that stuff.
So you can follow me at Greg Bishop, and it's Greg with 2 G's, so Gregg Bishop. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Greg Bishop NYC, or you can go to my website at gregbishop.nyc.
Yes, head there, follow him on all the socials. In the meantime, until next week, you can follow all of us as well on Instagram. You can follow me at Miss Tyler Simone. Tyler, where can they follow you?
You can, of course, follow me and get your entire life at the Tyler Tyson on all social media platforms.
Whatever you're looking for, you can come follow me on all social media platforms at I am J'Lamar.
Yes, we will see you guys next week. Stay safe.
Our founder, Keven Undergaro, and me, Maria Menounos, would like to thank you for tuning in to AfterBuzz TV. Remember, we're not just the first, we're the biggest in the world, and we're the only destination for all your favorite TV shows. Whatever you crave, we've got it. So go to AfterBuzzTV.com and check out our lineup. Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.